So we are going to dive right into the scholarship life cycle. And this is not working with the mouse. Okay, so when it comes to the scholarship life cycle, every college and unit is going to award scholarships a little differently. And so this is kind of a broad overview of what the scholarship life cycle looks like. And we're starting with the initial time that a donor comes to us and says, hey, I want to establish a scholarship. So coming from that initial conversation with our donors and creating a gift agreement. So we're going to talk about that a little in detail. Then we're going to look at how funds get created and how different accounts are created across the different units that we're all a part of. We're going to look at transferring funds because the foundation and campus are on different accounting databases. And so we have to talk a little bit about how we transfer funds back and forth. Then we're going to go into how students get awarded, and again, how that happens in each of our units. And then we'll go a little more deeper into donor stewardship. So those are all the areas that we're going to cover today. So when it comes to donor commitment, there are a few key elements that are important when our fundraisers are talking with donors about how to establish a scholarship. And really one of the first things we look at, it's funny because our Cindy Ravelli, who is our, she's, I don't know, the associate vice president basically over fundraising. And one of the things that she sent out today is looking at the donor why. Like that's kind of the primary place that when we're trying to understand how a scholarship is going to be awarded and how a donor wants a scholarship to be spent, we have to understand as fundraisers, what is their why? What kind of student do they want awarded? Who do they want to benefit from their gift? So that's kind of the first place that a fundraiser is going to start when it comes to establishing a scholarship, is looking at the donor why. The why is going to drive things like, what is the criteria for the scholarship? What kind of student do they want? The why is going to drive how much they contribute. It's going to drive, are they going to establish a scholarship, an endowment? What type of fund are they going to establish? And so the donor why is going to drive all of these pieces in order to put together a gift agreement. And so through conversations and through collaboration, a donor and the fundraiser is going to come up with what their why is and draft an actual gift agreement. Once the gift agreement is agreed upon, then it's signed. And so basically it's going to get signed by the donor, it gets signed by the foundation president, the dean signs this as well, or whoever is responsible in the college and unit. And the donor signature on the actual gift agreement is important when it comes to tracking purposes for the foundation, because whoever signs the agreement, that's kind of our gatekeeper for any changes that need to be made. If there's any adjustments, if we have questions about should the GPA be adjusted, or is there any criteria that needs to be changed, we're always going to look at who actually signed the gift agreement. And the gift agreement signatory is also the person that we look to when we're sending out reports, especially for our endowment reports. We look at who signed the gift agreement. So we don't send it out to everybody. We usually look at who is that signatory that's on the gift agreement. So lastly, once the gift agreement has been drafted, it's been signed, the last process that we look at is actually processing the gift agreement. And I wish that Tanya Williams is here. She's our associate director of gift processing, and she usually kind of walks everything through this process and makes sure that the I's get dotted and the T's crossed when it comes to putting together our gift agreements. But she's not here today, she's out on vacation. And so basically once everything is fully signed and executed, then Tanya works to get the gift agreement to the right people and the right places to ensure that our scholarships get awarded, to ensure that everybody knows what's happening when it comes to these new gifts that are processed. Now, there has been a recent change over the past couple years where the whole gift agreement is no longer sent out, but there is a summary page. So the summary page is going to sum up what's the fund's purpose, what is the criteria, what are the fund usage? Is it, again, we're talking about scholarships today, but sometimes the usage is for expenses or travel. There's different expenses that can be used for scholarships or funds in general. And so Tanya sends that out to the right people so that funds can be created, and we'll kind of talk about that a little bit more. But one of the things that we find is that, as we know, we're in a university where there's a lot of changes happening and positions are changing and people are kind of coming in and out. And so it's really important that we all work together so that we know, if we don't know if there's changes in your unit, if we don't know who the right person is to make sure that the gift agreement gets to them, then that's sometimes where balls can be dropped and things can get missed. And so it's really important that if you have somebody in your unit that needs to be getting these gift agreements, needs to be getting these gift summaries, please let us know so that we can always ensure that the right documentation is going out to the right people. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's a spendable scholarship versus what is an endowment. I think sometimes this can be a source of confusion. And so and that's one of the decisions that a donor is making when they're establishing a gift is, do they want to establish a spendable scholarship that can be utilized right now? Or do they want to look at endowment, which is an invested scholarship? It's something that is going to be given in perpetuity. So one of the primary differences between a spendable scholarship and an endowment is a spendable scholarship starts with a $5,000 minimum gift agreement. And so if a donor is looking at, that's within their budget of what they can afford to establish a scholarship, then they might be looking at a spendable one. That's something that, again, with $5,000, that can get established and it can be awarded now. You don't have to wait for funds to be invested. There's no funds maturing. And so they can make a gift and that can start making an impact now. An endowment is something that's invested. It usually needs to be invested for about 12 months, and you need a minimum of $30,000 in order to invest your endowment fund. Now, and again, with an endowment fund, these funds are invested. So that means that your gift is going to last in perpetuity. With a $5,000 gift, if the donor doesn't continue it, then, as soon as those $5,000 run out, then that scholarship is no longer active. With an endowment, those funds are invested and you'll be able to use the income that's earned on that investment, and we will award that in perpetuity. So those endowments will last essentially forever, as long as, obviously like market changes and things, but those funds last in perpetuity. And so that's one of those decisions that donors make, because those endowed funds really can make an impact on students for forever. And so it makes a huge, huge difference when it comes to our students and helping them to be awarded in the future. So we're going to talk a little bit now about creating funds and accounts. So when we receive donor funds, and again, this can get a little bit confusing because we're all working in different databases. So in most cases, when a gift agreement gets processed, a new fund request is going to accompany this new gift agreement that gets established. And the documentation is provided to the accounting team as well as the associate director of gift processing. Now, there are two primary databases that we operate in within the foundation. We use what's called Raiser's Edge, which is primarily all of our donor records. And so what they're giving to, their giving history, where they work, their contact information, all our donor information lives in Raiser's Edge. The accounting team operates on a software called Financial Edge. So this is really relatively all of the fund information. So you're not going to see any donor information in Financial Ed. It's going to be all of just our fund records. And so once a fund gets established, once a scholarship is established, the accounting team kind of is at has a first set of eyes, and they go through and they set up an account in what's called Financial Edge. Then that paperwork is processed, it gets transferred over to our records department, and they create a corresponding fund in a Raiser's Edge. And then monthly, these funds they basically get kind of audited to make sure that the right funds are going into the right accounts in Financial Edge, the right account in Raiser's Edge, and everything is reconciled on a monthly basis. Now, once the funds are created on the foundation side, again, we have two different operating systems in the foundation, but campus actually works on a completely different financial system, a completely different accounting system. So the main campus works in what's called Workday. And so once an account is created here, a corresponding account is going to need to be created in Workday in order for anything to be awarded to students. So we have to establish our accounts here first, and And then once they're established here, then an account has to be created in Workday. And that the Workday account is called a work tag. It's usually going to be a gift account, which is a GF number. Now, gift accounts the foundation doesn't have anything to do with establishing gift accounts. And actually financial aid, unless if they're awarding the scholarship, they don't have anything to do with gift accounts either. So gift accounts the trigger for creating a gift account is going to be within the business college unit, and it's started within the Office of Business Affairs. So the business, let's say the business manager is going to send a request into business affairs, and that's what's going to trigger creating the work tag. It gets verified by our office. Our office looks at the agreement and verifies the uses for the funds. Again, is it a scholarship? Is it for expenses? Is it for travel? So we verify what it's used for, but we don't have anything to do with establishing the work tag, and neither does financial aid. But financial aid does have another important part, because financial aid everybody needs, in order for funds to transfer back and forth, you need to know what the foundation account is, and you need to know what the work tag is. But financial aid also has their own system. And so financial aid, in order to get it into PeopleSoft, financial aid needs to create what's called an item type. And so, yeah, if your head isn't spinning at this point, I don't know what will make it spin, but basically financial aid, in order for students to get awarded, financial aid has to create what's called an item type. And so that's going to be that puts it into the PeopleSoft system in order for students to get awarded. So lots of moving pieces in order to get a scholarship established and awarded to our students. So to kind of put it all together when it comes to transferring our funds. So it's when funds need to get transferred, when we're, getting to, again, the start of the fall semester where we're going to be awarding students, the initial step is that the college is going to send a monetary transfer fund to the foundation. The foundation is going to review it, and they're going to, well, actually, I'm sorry, the monetary transfer funds, the MTF, is going to get signed off by the dean of the college. It gets sent over to the foundation. We verify that the funds are available. We verify the uses for the funds, and then we go ahead and we transfer that into Workday. And then once the funds are in Workday, then the funds are going to be available for you to award it to your students. So we talked a little bit about creating accounts, about transferring funds. So now we're going to look at how students actually get awarded. So there are several different processes when it comes to awarding students. One of the first things that we look at is we have to know what scholarships we have to award. And I think that's a really important part. Again, something that can kind of slip through the cracks sometimes, especially again, as there's changes, as every college and unit is going to do this a little bit differently. And so having a system to track what scholarships you have that are active within your unit is really, really important. And we're going to talk about that a little more in detail in the next presentation. But it's important that every college and unit has a system that they're tracking their scholarships. And on top of tracking the scholarships and the student criteria, also tracking your fund balances and knowing how much do you have available to award, because that's going to drive what students get awarded. So once you kind of review what scholarships you have available, the next step is going to be selecting your student recipients. And we're going to talk a little bit more about donor criteria, but it's going to be based on, major, maybe financial need, their GPA, and the awarding unit is really responsible for ensuring that our donor criteria is met when they're selecting students for these scholarships. So once those students are selected, the next step is we have to get that information to financial aid. So financial aid has a template for a scholarship roster. So the roster is going to include the student recipients that are going to be that are eligible for the scholarship that you want to award. So it's going to include things like a student entry number, their name, the award amount, what the GF is for the scholarship name. So it's going to include all of this data, and that's going to get sent to financial aid so that they can actually award our students. Then that's the next step, is awarding our students. So financial aid goes ahead and they verify that the funds are available, and they go ahead and they actually add the scholarship to the student's account. The timeline for awarding scholarships based on, again, like we did a lot of learning about this with financial aid about scholarship leveraging. And so The scholarship, getting the first roster over to financial aid, that starts as early as December 1st now, especially when you're looking at using scholarships for recruiting and well, really for recruiting purposes, you're going to get those rosters over to financial aid as early as December 1st. And then the last part is going to be how scholarships disperse. So basically, in order for a scholarship to disperse, the first thing is that the funds have to be available in Workday. And then for scholarship disbursement, scholarships disperse 10 days prior to the start of the semester. So right now, you have students that might be coming to you, and I know, sometimes you're looking at student balances and you're like, oh my gosh, how am I paying for school? And so students can start getting nervous, but scholarships disperse 10 days prior to classes starting. And so I think that's important to learn. And then once classes start, then scholarships can disperse, as long as funds are available. But in this period in the semester, it's going to be 10 days prior to semester starting. So I wanted to talk a little bit about common awarding issues because, as we know, finances can be very stressful for our students. And so these are issues that, in my experience, and I probably didn't do a very good job of introducing myself. I apologize if I didn't do that. I'm Jennifer Martinez. I am the Director of Donor Stewardship and Scholarship here at UNLV. I've been at UNLV for 10 years. I started in the financial aid office, and so I actually worked in financial aid. I was the scholarship coordinator for several years over in the financial aid office. So I've had the opportunity to kind of work on both sides of the house, working directly with students, awarding scholarships, and now working on the other side and processing scholarships on the back end and working with our donors. And so these were a lot of issues that I saw, again, like when I was working with students face-to-face in the financial aid and scholarships office. And when students are, again, like when they're feeling stressed out about their finances, when scholarships haven't dispersed, then it creates more work for everybody. I know that, that's when students are coming to your door and crying because, they're super stressed about how to pay for school or pay for rent or books. And so I think these are we're trying to look at ways that we can be more proactive versus reactive when we're looking at awarding scholarships. So one of the first things that can impact scholarship awarding is not meeting eligibility. So financial aid has a few safeguards in place to ensure that donor criteria is met, but not a whole lot, just a few. And so basically some of the criteria that can be safeguards with financial aid is GPA, as well as credit load, if they're a grad or undergrad. So those are a few areas that can really impact if a scholarship is going to disperse or not. So if you have a student who's graduating and the scholarship requires that they're full-time, but the student only needs 9 credits to graduate, it's going to stop their aid from dispersing. Not their aid in general, but it's going to stop their scholarship from dispersing if there's a hold on there that they have to be full-time. And so I think it's important, things like being waitlisted for a class, graduating, special circumstances where maybe, even if their GPA is like point something off, like 0.1 off, it can still stop a scholarship from actually dispersing. And so when it comes to MOU, the criteria for gift agreements, it can only be overridden by a donor. So, the college unit can't just, well, that student's graduating, it's okay. If the donor requires that they're full-time, then that's the partnership where we really rely on our fundraisers to work with our donors if any exceptions need to be made, because we don't have the authority to just make those exceptions. Another awarding issue is just funds not being awarded. And so that's actually a project that I'm working now, is looking at what scholarships have not been awarded over the past year, because unfortunately we have money that sits, it just doesn't get awarded. And sometimes it's because donor criteria is really strict. Sometimes it's because maybe a scholarship has just kind of gone through the cracks and it just got missed. And so it's our responsibility to ensure that our donor funds are spent. And really, ultimately it hurts our students if we have money sitting on the table that doesn't get awarded. And so we want to make sure that we have a tracking system in place so that scholarships don't fall through the cracks. Another common awarding issue is an awarding philosophy. So basically, even just something as simple as, should this scholarship be used as recruitment or retention? Something as simple as that can drive how the scholarship gets awarded. Because sometimes when a scholarship has really loose criteria, it's like, well, who do I award it to then? And so that can be a little overwhelming if you're trying to figure out who's going to receive the scholarship. Or if the scholarship is so restrictive, then that can make it difficult as well. But the dean, the donor, the campus leadership, those can all be great driving forces of our awarding philosophy of how our scholarships are best used. And that's even where the whole conversation about scholarship leveraging came in, is making sure that we're being responsible with the donor funds that we have. One of the last awarding issues that we've run into is missing deadlines. And so, scholarships have updated their, or not scholarships, but basically the financial aid office has updated their timeline for getting these scholarship rosters in. And, again, depending if it's based on recruitment or retention, that's going to drive the deadline for these scholarship rosters. And so missing deadlines can be, again, like that can definitely hold up a student. A student may be promised a scholarship, even as early as March, but if you don't get the roster over to financial aid until later, then that can hold up the whole process. And our cycle has begun much, much sooner. And so it's important that we meet those deadlines.